Today, you're going to learn English through story. This is the incredible true life story of Colonel Sanders. This story is called Colonel Sanders' Recipe for Success. And as we review the story, you're going to learn phrasal verbs, idioms, and expressions, advanced grammar, and correct pronunciation. Welcome back to JForrest English. Of course, I'm Jennifer. Now let's get started. Harlan David Sanders, better known as Colonel Sanders, encountered many setbacks and obstacles before he became the success we know today. Of course, notice that pronunciation of colonel. Colonel. It sounds nothing like the spelling. Repeat after me. Colonel, Colonel, Colonel Sanders. And notice here, encounter setbacks and obstacles. So you can use encounter as the verb to go with setbacks and obstacles. A setback is a noun. It's a delay or problem that prevents progress, or it makes it difficult to achieve a goal. For example, the business faced a significant setback when their main supplier increased prices. Notice I used faced. That is also a collocation. So you can say encountered or more casually faced. Don't worry about taking these notes because I summarize everything in a free lesson PDF. You can find the link in the description. Now, an obstacle. Repeat after me. Obstacle. This is a noun. It's also something that blocks or hinders progress or achievement. For example, one obstacle for many English learners, maybe you, is understanding natives in the real world. Is that an obstacle you face? And maybe you're thinking, well, Jennifer's lessons will help me overcome this obstacle. So you encounter or face an obstacle and you overcome an obstacle. So what do you think? Do you think my lessons will help you overcome this obstacle? If you do, put that's right, put that's right in the comments. Now let's continue the story. Born in 1890, Sanders worked various odd jobs throughout his life to make ends meet, including farming, working as a steamboat fireman, and running a service station in Corbin, Kentucky. Notice that preposition. He was born in 1890. If you have a specific calendar date, you need to change the preposition. He was born on September 9th, 1890. Now, do you know what an odd job is? This is a noun, and it's a small, temporary, or informal task or work, and it often requires little skill or training. For example, while studying, he took on several odd jobs to support himself. Now notice, to support himself, I could also say to make ends meet, which we have in our story. This is an idiom and it means to earn just enough money to cover your basic living expenses. For example, after his company closed, he struggled to make ends meet by working odd jobs. Let's continue. In the service station, he served meals and his fried chicken became popular with customers. Notice here, to become popular. We use the verb become and conjugated in the past simple became to talk about the transition from not popular to popular. So you might ask, how did Colonel Sanders become famous? Well, that's what we're learning right now, so let's continue the story. However, when a new highway was built, fewer customers stopped by, and he had to close his restaurant. Now notice the use of however. This is an adverb, and it's used to introduce a contrast. For example, she studied hard for her exam. That's positive. She didn't pass. That's negative. We can connect them together by saying, however, she didn't pass. But you can reverse the order of the contrast. You can say she didn't study for the exam, which is a negative. She passed, which is a positive. However, she passed. Now let's talk about to stop by. This is a useful phrasal verb to have in your vocabulary. It means to visit briefly or for a short period of time, often informally. For example, she stopped by my office to drop off the documents before her meeting. So maybe she didn't have an appointment, so that's informally, or it was a very brief, very fast visit. Let's continue. Sanders had tried and failed at several other ventures, including selling insurance and operating a failed restaurant. Do you know what a venture is? This is a noun, and it's a business or activity that involves taking risks in the hope of making a profit or simply achieving something. We often use this in the business world. Starting a tech company is a risky venture. A risky venture, it's a noun. But it can also be very rewarding. But is the casual, everyday form of however. So notice it's also used for that contrast. Risky, rewarding. That's the contrast. We can combine them together with but or however. Let's keep going. Despite his financial struggles and constant disappointments, he refused to give up on his dream. Just like you refuse to give up, right? Let's talk about despite. This is a preposition, and it's used to introduce a fact or situation that contrasts with or makes the following statement surprising or unexpected. For example, despite the rain, the event was a huge success. So there's a contrast there because you think the rain would negatively impact the success. So that's the surprise. Despite the rain, the event was a huge success. Let's keep going. At 65 years old, notice years with an S and then old. You can say at 65 or at 65 years old. At 65 years old, with only a small pension, he gave it another shot. To give something a shot, this is a very useful idiom. Natives use it a lot, and it means to try something. You should give learning phrasal verbs a shot. Try learning phrasal verbs. Now, to give something another shot means to try again. But you try again because there was a failed attempt. So you give it a shot, you fail, and you give it another shot, which means you try again. Let's keep going. He traveled across the country cooking for restaurant owners and offering them his secret recipe. He made a deal. They could use his recipe, and in return, he would get a small percentage of their sales. Let's talk about in return. You can also say in exchange. This is a phrase, and it means that you give something in order to get something. For example, she stayed late on Wednesday, so she gave her time. But what did she receive? So you can say, and in return, or and in exchange, she left early on Friday. So she gave her time on Wednesday, but then she received time back on Friday. In return, in exchange. Let's keep going. He faced rejection after rejection. Notice that collocation, you face rejection. He faced rejection after rejection with exactly 1,009 people turning him down. Can you believe that? 1,009 people turning him down. So to turn someone down, that means to reject someone. And the him was Colonel Sanders. So it's saying 1,009 people rejected Colonel Sanders. Now let's use despite. You can say despite being rejected. You need the gerund verb after despite. Despite being rejected 1,009 times, Colonel Sanders gave it another shot. He tried again, even though he failed 1,009 times. That's pretty amazing, isn't it? Let's continue. Finally, Sanders got a yes. What followed was nothing short of extraordinary. I like this phrase, nothing short of, and then you can have a positive adjective. This is used to emphasize that something is completely or entirely remarkable or impressive or whatever positive adjective. You can say the team's effort was nothing short of extraordinary. So you're saying it was extremely remarkable, impressive, incredible, astonishing. Those are all synonyms that you can use instead of extraordinary. Let's continue. Sanders built up a massive empire with KFC, a globally recognized brand that is still famous today. Notice that phrasal verb to build up. This means to develop or increase something, but gradually over time. So it didn't happen overnight. It built up gradually over time. So you could say she worked hard to build up her vocabulary with phrasal verbs, idioms, and expressions, which is exactly what you're doing right now. Let's continue. By the way, Sanders wasn't a real colonel. The title came from a Kentucky governor who made him an honorary colonel in recognition of his contribution to Kentucky's cuisine. Sanders embraced the title and became known as Colonel Sanders. Did you know that? Did you know that he wasn't a real colonel? Notice how this paragraph started with by the way. By the way, this is an idiom. It's used to introduce a new subject or to give further information. So let's talk about a new subject. Maybe you're talking to your colleague or coworker and you say, once you update the report, please send it to the client. Now you want to say something not related to that. You can say, by the way, I'm working from home tomorrow, or anything else that isn't related. By the way, did you notice the silent H in honorary? First of all, notice how I use by the way because I just transitioned away from the last point to a new point. But did you notice that? Honorary, honorary. The same thing for honor because honorary comes from the word honor, no H, and also hour, hour. Those are very common silent H's. Let's continue. Through every challenge, Colonel Sanders proved that perseverance and self-belief are the true secret recipe for success. Do you appreciate the last line in this story? I appreciate it because it is a clever use of language. We call this a play on words, a play on words. Do you know why this is a clever use of language? Well, you may know that KFC has a secret recipe. It's part of the reason it's popular. It became popular because of the secret recipe, which contains 11 herbs and spices. But here, they're using secret recipe in a different way. They're using it to refer to the traits and qualities that made him successful. That's the recipe for his success. So it's a clever use of language. Now I'll read the story in full from start to finish. Harlan David Sanders, better known as Colonel Sanders, encountered many setbacks and obstacles before he became the success we know today. Born in 1890, Sanders worked various odd jobs throughout his life to make ends meet, including farming, working as a steamboat fireman, and running a service station in Corbin, Kentucky. In the service station, he served meals, and his fried chicken became popular with customers. However, when a new highway was built, fewer customers stopped by, and he had to close his restaurant. Sanders had tried and failed at several other ventures, including selling insurance and operating a failed restaurant. Despite his financial struggles and constant disappointments, he refused to give up on his dream. At 65 years old, with only a small pension, he gave it another shot. He traveled across the country cooking for restaurant owners and offering them his secret recipe. He made a deal. They could use his recipe, and in return, he would get a small percentage of their sales. He faced rejection after rejection, with exactly 1,009 people turning him down. He weathered endless disappointment, but refused to let it deter him. Finally, after all the rejections, Sanders got a yes. What followed was nothing short of extraordinary. Sanders built up a massive empire with KFC, a globally recognized brand that is still famous today. By the way, Sanders wasn't a real colonel. The title came from a Kentucky governor who made him an honorary colonel in recognition of his contribution to Kentucky's cuisine. Sanders embraced the title and became known as Colonel Sanders. Through every challenge, Colonel Sanders proved that perseverance and self-belief are the true secret recipe for success. Do you want me to make another Learn English Through Story lesson? If you do, put let's go in the comments. And of course, make sure you like this lesson, share it with your friends, and subscribe so you're notified every time I post a new lesson. And you can get this free speaking guide where I share 6 tips on how to speak English fluently and confidently. You can click here to download it or look for the link in the description. And here's another lesson I know you'll love. Make sure you watch it now.